Happy Devil's Thursday. This is At the Point. At the Point. I'm your host, Sam Wu, here with Bruce Zeman, streaming live on Facebook Live, YouTube Live, X Live, and Twitch on the Let's Go Devils Network. Talking NHL hockey on this fine Thursday afternoon, drive time, live. NHL 4-Nation tourney. The rosters have come out. Bruce, I know you got a lot of opinions about the roster. Who got snubbed? Who got on? Tell me a little bit more about it.
Well, first of all, for folks that are tuning into the podcast and don't know about this tournament, it's coming up February 12th through the 20th. 4 nations, USA, Canada, Sweden, and Finland are playing at the Bell Center and also Boston Garden. And the rosters came out. And really the biggest part of this discussion is players that didn't make it. And, you know, Sam, there's always some discussion on and opinions on who made it, who shouldn't have made it. But before we talk a little bit about that, this tournament is scheduled to replace the All-Star game at least this year. And to me, one of the great things about this tournament is that it's quite the spectacle for the fans, especially at the Bell Center, Boston Garden, two of the most iconic places to see a hockey game. But with the All-Star game in years past and All-Star weekend, you've got, well, back in the day you had one game, and then in the past couple of years you've had 2 or 3 games, round robin into a championship. You only have, and I'm probably not going to phrase this correctly, you've only got a couple of opportunities to get injured. My issue with a tournament like this, and I don't even know if it's an issue, it's just, I think, a fact, is that, you know, each team is going to play 2 or 3 games. And so you've got those games, and you've got the championship. So you've got 6 or 7 games where you could lose, hopefully not, but you could lose a Connor McDavid, Jack Hughes, or something like that. And I think that's something that, maybe they're not saying it, but I think that that's something that a lot of the teams are really concerned about. I mean, if you're the GM of a team that's really in contention for a Stanley Cup, I know you want the player to play for his country and do things like this, but do you want to put the risk on someone like Connor McDavid or Jack Hughes, both of whom, and I'm just using those 2 players as an example, players that have had some injury issues? Do you want to expose them to, 6 or 7 more games where they could get hurt?
Yeah, and there's a lot of imbalance, too, because it's only 4 nations. What about the Russian players?
Well, I made some calls earlier today, and I was talking to a bunch of different people about that. And in our previous podcast, we speculated perhaps that whether some of that has to do with politics that are going on in the world. And I got some different opinions from the ones that you and I had spoken about. Some folks that I talked to thought that it might have been a logistic issue, getting those players here, because it wasn't just like Russia that we're talking about. There's potentially other countries, but what this is, though, is it's the nations that are involved are the nations that the NHL has agreements with their ice hockey federations. So all of these players are pro. And so in years past, there's been players that have been on like national teams, for example, that are not in this tournament because they couldn't. I don't know whether they tried to or they just couldn't come up with an agreement. But, when you have a tournament that's supposed to be the best of the best, I mean, it's really, you can't really say it's the best of the best because especially, and I'm just going to use Russia for an example. I mean, Igor Shesterkin is arguably the best goalie in the world, and he's not in this tournament. So, is it really the best of the best, or it's just the best of the teams that are playing?
Yeah. But at least you don't have to worry about injuries. If you have Russian players on your roster, on your NHL roster, That's what I'm saying. It's kind of weird. All of it's imbalance. I get the whole, and that's very typical of Gary Bettman because it's the NHL's ruled, but it's very lawyer like. It's like, okay, we're going to reward the ones that we have agreements with.
Well, and it's also, and I hate to say this, and people have busted my chops a little bit about this, but I've been saying this for 4 or 5 years. What people have to remember, the NHL and all professional sports teams, it's a business, and it's a what have you done for me lately? And I really do believe that, and I'm just going to use the NHL because we're talking about them. If they could put an NHL team on Saturn and make money, they would do it. Especially at $1 billion a team buy-in. They would absolutely do it as long as it was going to make the league money. So that's what this is about first and foremost. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later in the podcast. There are some players that got snubbed that, and we'll talk about this when we get to the Devils segment of our show. Dougie Hamilton snubbed off the Canadian roster. I think that actually may be a blessing for him. We'll talk more about that later. But, it's a big deal. It's coming up February 12th to the 20th. And, again, a couple of venues. The Bell Center up in Montreal, and then you've got TD Garden down in Boston, which I don't know if you've had a chance to go to both of those venues, Sam. You probably have, but, boy, those are great places to see games.
Bell Center, yes. If you've ever sat in the media section, you're literally on the catwalk and you just look down. It's freaking awesome. Yeah, it's awesome. You get the feel. You hear pretty much what the people are saying. It's got a good electric atmosphere. The Bell Center, TD, or as what Max says, TD Garden. I never went to the old Boston Garden, but I've been to, well, it was Fleet Center, and it changed names so many times. But now it's the TD Garden. Not a bad place. Had a good time there. I wouldn't say it's like the Bell Center, but it's a nice arena. Boston has transformed as a city as a whole. You remember the Big Dig? How long that took?
Well, it's funny you mention that because I was telling my beautiful wife about the old Boston Garden. When I went to school at St. Michael's College up in Vermont, back in the day, we would go down to Boston and Hartford. Used to love seeing the Whalers in the mall. But when you would go to the old Boston Garden, and anybody that has been to this will know what I'm talking about, when you would sit up in the cheap seats, which were, I think they were the yellows, I think that's what they were called, you would literally be fighting for your food with some of the animals that lived there. And you would be up in those seats. Oh, my goodness. You'd be like, and I can't really explain it. They were rats. But they were friendly. Like, they'd be like, all right, where's my hot dog? And they would literally be up there, and you'd be walking them, and they'd be like, what's up? Yeah. But you're right. It has transformed, and that was such a great place to see a game. But these, I think, are going to be solid venues. And, there's already been some talk, like, if this is successful, are they going to expand this? Because, really, if you're talking about Montreal and Boston, you could certainly put something together where you went to, say, Maple Leaf Gardens or Madison Square Garden or in Chicago. There's so many places you could go, but I just think this is going to be an awesome tournament. Again, my concern, if I'm an NHL GM, is just the possibility of injuries, because what's going to happen if somebody really important gets hurt? The fans are going to say, well, why did he play in this tournament? I don't know. I don't know when else they would do it, because you're not going to do it in May or June, right? But right in the middle of the season, losing a Jack Hughes or a Connor McDavid or you pick here, that can completely derail a team's season. Mm-hmm. So,
right before trade deadline as well. And it has happened. Even if you go to other sports. like Major League Baseball, right before the season started, while he was celebrating, Edwin Diaz, I forgot what he hurt, his something tendon, in his leg. Done for the season. Done. After the New York Mets, paid him a boatload of money, in his contract extension. So it does happen. It's just part of the game. It is a business. It helps the NHL as a whole. From a legal standpoint, from an insurance standpoint, how are these players covered? Are they covered by the team's insurance? Is it covered by the NHL? Do they have a supplemental insurance? That part I'm kind of interested to know. But the fans, it's just part of the game, unfortunately. And you don't want to see anybody get hurt, but it's bound to happen. Maybe not this year, but maybe next year or whenever. But then again, you can get injured walking down the street, for crying out loud. So,
the only difference to me is that, in baseball, unless you're having a play at the plate or maybe a slide into second, hockey is a very physical, very violent sport, and players are going to hit each other on purpose.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit different, but again, you're right. And, just the insurance part of it, talk about legalese and lawyers. My goodness, I'm sure, they've looked at all that. So it's going to be great, though, and I'm going to watch it, and we'll see who comes out on top. But, like we were talking about, the rosters came out, and, there are some interesting snubs. And I guess it's probably kind of hard when you're trying to pick, who to put on for different reasons. But I just want to go over some of the notable snubs. And by the way, some of the stats that I'm going to give you are courtesy of usatoday.com. I want to make sure to give out credit where credit is due. But for the U.S., Cole Caulfield, the Montreal Canadiens left off. Hasn't been a fantastic year for him, but he's got 16 goals, and he's off the roster. Tage Thompson from the Sabres also. And in net, you've got Joseph Wall for the Toronto Maple Leafs, who's having a pretty good year. They're not on the roster. Now, for Canada, there's some bigger names, which I don't necessarily agree with. I don't know what your take is. They left Connor Bedard off from the Chicago Blackhawks, and Bedard at some point I think is probably going to be the face of the NHL. He's a great player on a team that's not very good, the Blackhawks. Evan Bouchard from the Edmonton Oilers, and goaltender Joey Decord from the, I hope I said that correctly, from the Seattle Kraken. Also not on. And the Maple Leafs have arguably one of the best tandems in the league this year with Anthony Stolarz, so that's a little bit of a surprise. Now, Sweden, William Eklund from the San Jose Sharks. We got Richard Rakell from the Pittsburgh Penguins, and I can never say his name correctly, so I'll apologize in advance. Jonas Korpisalo from the Bruins. I'm sorry, he's on Finland. He didn't make it. And so, just a couple of the notable snubs that didn't make it. But one of the other ones that did not make the USA Today list was the Devils' Dougie Hamilton. A little bit of a surprise, but he had some injury issues, and, we'll talk about that a little bit more later.
Yeah, I wonder, there's always that thing that when you introduce a player, like, I don't know, 12-time All-Star, Alexander Ovechkin or whatever the number is. Does this count as being an all-star since it's not an all-star game?
I would think it is. Because I'm sure, not being a lawyer, and maybe I should look into this, I'm sure there's probably players that have got contract incentives in their contract for getting named to this.
Yeah.
Because it does promote the team.
I would assume this would count as like an all-star. So if,
I'll have to look into it.
Yeah, I'm just kind of interested because anytime you change the dynamics, is this an all-star? Is it not? But how is that fair to the Russian players who are truly all-stars but can't participate in this tournament?
Well, it's not really fair, but and you're never going to get an answer, I don't think, at least an honest answer for why they weren't included. But it very possibly could be something just as simple as that they couldn't work out an agreement with either the Russian Ice Hockey Federation or the KHL or whoever they had to work it out with. But
I would I would love to ask somebody in the NHL, like, okay, Shesterkin, I'm making up a scenario. I don't know if he does. He has a clause in his contract that if he makes, the All-Star roster, he gets a $50,000 bonus. Something like that.
Well, I'm sure there are players that have that.
Yeah. I'm just kind of wondering. I'm sure they covered that. Otherwise, they'd be up in arms.
Well, I mean, really, the incentive for the players is that they want to, a lot of them want to play for their country. And, you don't blame them for being, upset if they're left off the roster. But, I mean, and if you look at the rosters, we don't really have time to look at them in depth here. But, I mean, if you look at the rosters, I mean, the roster that Canada has got is just stacked.
Yeah.
But again, you're 100% correct. I mean, if you're talking about the best of the best, it's really hard to say it's that without the Russian players.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Switching gears, Bruce. Sorry, my phone just turned off.
That's okay.
Coaches on the hot seat. You're thinking Detroit, Nashville, Pittsburgh, and both the Islanders and Rangers?
So let's talk about this a little bit. I was making some calls earlier yesterday and also today and talking to some of the contacts that I have, some of which you have as well. We've talked before on our show about Mike Sullivan in Pittsburgh and Andrew Burnett in Nashville. There's also some talk now about Derek Lalonde in Detroit being on the hot seat. But interestingly enough, and I don't know if you saw this rumor, Peter Laviolette in New York. Some rumblings coming out now that he may not be their guy. It's been denied by a lot of different people, including some sources I have. But there's some other sources that say that Chris Drury, the GM there, is seriously thinking about shaking things up. Now, whether it's Jacob Trouba or Chris Kreider or one of the other players, he should probably be concerned. And I was watching one of the other shows. I believe it was because I like to give credit where credit is due. It's important to do this in this business. I was watching the Spit and Chicklets podcast earlier this week, which I love a lot. It's a great show. And, they were talking about really how a lot of the issues the Rangers have that are usually kept in the room, so to speak, have kind of come out. And is that on purpose? Is it a leak? You don't know. But, I mean, I don't think you're going to bring in a high-profile coach like Peter Laviolette and not give him some leeway. But as we've seen in the past, that doesn't always work out that way. I mean, look at what the Bruins did. So that's one scenario. But getting to the Islanders, things are reportedly, allegedly, not too great over there. And from what I've been told, I think Patrick Waugh is probably safe as the coach, but one of the interesting pieces of information that I got from some of the folks that I talked to is the GM over there, Mr. Lamoriello, may not be safe.
I would have to agree. I mean, I would agree he would be on the hot seat. I mean, how old is he now? 81 right now? 81 years old right now. And, you're going to have to find eventually a successor at some point. I mean, Lou can't go on forever. I mean, I'm sure he would like to, but when you're not getting results like you want, and you're spending a boatload of money, and you've got money tied into a lot of these contracts, sometimes it's best to make a move. But I think the Islanders are really, I mean, they went all in, but only have a first-round appearance to show for it, unfortunately.
Well,
after told, go ahead.
I'm sorry. There's a delay, and I didn't hear you right away. But what I was going to say is what I've been told, and again, this is purely from folks around the team that I talk to from time to time, is that Lou and Patrick are not really speaking to each other. And I don't know if that's true, but that's just what I was told. I've told that it's amicable, but they're not really all warm and fuzzy. Again, I'm going to see if I can find out some more about that for maybe our next show. But if you've got the GM, and if you're being honest, Sam, we've got a very, very high-profile GM, and you got a pretty high-profile head coach. If that's coming out that they're not talking, that's a problem.
Agreed. And you know what? To tell you the truth, when Lou hired Patrick Waugh, I was shocked because I could see those two personalities clash, and it doesn't surprise me that they're clashing right now. I mean, Lou is always set in his ways. He always says there's a right way of doing things and a wrong way, but I'm sure Patrick Waugh may have a different opinion, and he is very. He's had a reputation of being hot-headed and my way or the highway as well. If you remember what happened in Montreal and, orchestrating that trade, leaving the bench.
His experience in Colorado didn't really end that well either. And He admits that. Well, listen, we all make mistakes. I mean, you grow as a person, as a player, as a coach. But I think at some point they've got to decide, are they going to rebuild? Because right now they're kind of right in the middle of the pack, and you're right. I mean, you haven't really seen much other than that one playoff appearance, and what are you going to do? So that remains to be seen. But if we're talking about who really is on the hot seat, like the next coach to go, I mean, we saw Jim Montgomery get axed by the Bruins. I mean, I think this situation in Detroit is going to come to a head at some point. Steve Yzerman has never been afraid to make big moves. And although I'm not sure it would be the right move, and you have to say this because you don't know what's going on in the room. To people like us that are on the outside, for the most part, you don't know if, the GM or the ownership, hears something that they don't like, And that's the same thing when we were talking about the Bruins. I mean, a lot of people, myself included, thought that, it was a huge overreaction, but maybe they heard something that they didn't like because, believe it or not, because this is a business, and I'm going to use Connor McDavid for an example. If something's going on in Edmonton that Connor McDavid is really unhappy with, I hate to say this, but, and I guess I could be wrong. I don't think I am. A coach is not going to win the battle with Connor McDavid in Edmonton. It's just not going to happen. If he's really pissed about something and he goes to ownership, one of two things is going to happen. They're going to go to the coach or whoever and say, listen, this needs to change, as long as it's legitimate, obviously. But I mean, and just to take a step back to look at the Devils situation, I actually think that's why Lindy Ruff was around for so long, because Jack Hughes loved playing for him, loved him.
Yeah.
And he came out and supported him on, we talked about this. He spoke about him, on multiple occasions, how much he liked him. I mean, if all of a sudden you've got Jack and Nico and some of the other leaders on this team saying, I'm not sure this is working, guess what? He's gone.
Yeah. And Andrew Burnett, Mike Sullivan, obviously on the hot seat.
That's a different situation, too, because Mike Sullivan is coaching the U.S. team in this Four Nations tournament. So I don't think anything's going to happen to him, because how awful would that look for the Penguins if they fired their coach who's now going to coach in the Four Nations tournament? And imagine he goes on to win the whole thing.
Yeah.
Again, these teams look at these things, they draw everything out, they figure, I don't know if he's going to be the coach next year, but I think he's probably safe for the season just because of the high-profile position he has. Mike Sullivan is another coach that if he gets fired by the Penguins, he'll have another job before Christmas. He'll have another job before Christmas. Now, getting to Nashville is a situation that's tough, even as an analyst, to figure out, because, their GM, Barry Trotz, has come out and said, like, things need to change. Like, things need to get on track soon. Unless you're going to just chalk this season up to things not working well. But they're not going to do that in the NHL. So I think that if you're asking me who could be next, I think it could be Detroit and Nashville. I think those are the next two coaches to go.
Yeah. Speaking of which, one is still available. Somewhat controversial. Not somewhat. Pretty controversial. Comes with baggage. Joel Quenneville. What's your take?
So I want to just put this out there for folks that are listening to our podcast, because we do, and Sam, chime in here too if you don't agree with me or have other thoughts. We try to keep this family friendly for the most part, so we're not going to rehash everything that happened with the Blackhawks and the scandal. If you want to look up what happened, you can Google it and you can find all the information there. But basically, and I'm prefacing this, and please look up the details before you make up your mind. Basically, why Joel Quenneville was out of the league for a couple of years was because of an inadequate response to something that happened during the Blackhawks scandal. And so suspended by the league, reinstated along with a couple of other executives, most notably Stan Bowman, who's now the GM of the Edmonton Oilers. But Joel Quenneville has been rumored to be a coaching potential in a bunch of these cities, but there's a lot of baggage that comes with that. And, the question has been, and this has been bandied about not just on this show, but on podcasts all over the world that deal with hockey, like, does he get back into the league? And I've kind of got a long answer to that. Sam, what are your thoughts?
Well, he had to be reinstated by the league, right? And he obviously met a certain criteria with Gary Bettman and Bill Daly to be reinstated. Same with Stan Bowman. Stan Bowman found a job with the Edmonton Oilers. Even meeting that criteria, I think the league stance on it was, okay, you've been punished. Let the market dictate whether you find a job or not. Because it is a lot of baggage, a tremendous amount of baggage, because a trust was violated pretty badly. So, will the market, these 32 teams, some of them looking for coaches, are they willing to take a risk on this? Because it could be a PR nightmare with that baggage. But if you move past that as a coach, remember, he was the foundation before Andrew Brunette took over as interim head coach of the Florida Panthers, and they were on a hot start in the NHL. Which 2 years later, now that there's Stanley Cup champions, or 3 years later, Stanley Cup champions. It went from Joel Quenneville to interim head coach Andrew Brunette, then Paul Maurice. So I think from a coaching qualifications, he's got it, obviously. But has he, the punishment, I don't know the details. Did he have to go through some training or whatever that he had to, but he, according to Gary Bettman, if I remember in the press release, that he was very remorseful and has taken steps to, better himself personally. It's just, is that enough for the market to bring in a great head coach, but enough for the team to absorb some of the baggage that comes with it? Is there a market there? Is there a team willing to take that risk, essentially?
This is a tough one. It really is, because if you're going by strictly a hockey sense, I agree with you completely. 100%. Second winningest coach ever. He's been the architect of some great teams, especially with the Blackhawks.
Plus, he's a former New Jersey Devil, by the way, as a player.
Yeah, former Hartford Whaler as well. And but boy, I was thinking about this, and people make mistakes. Sometimes they make really bad mistakes. And he went through what the league mandated him to do, to be reinstated, along with, a couple of other executives. And now he's back. I think what I would do if I was a GM and I was going to go down that road, and I don't know if this is going to sound silly to a lot of folks, but if he does this, if you hire him, he's, in my opinion, is going to have to almost do like an apology tour before he's embraced. Embraced is probably not the right word, but like, I've seen him on some interviews, and he basically said, had he known about this, he would have. That's fantastic. But if you, and again, completely different situation, but if you look at the uproar over the Bruins signing of Mitch Miller, I guess that was last year. I think it was last year.
Yeah.
A player that had done some just awful things to a high school, a fellow high school student, which was absolutely horrendous. Just a terrible decision by the Bruins. I think the fallout from this is going to be pretty significant. It's just a question of is it something that a team is willing to not, I don't want to say put up with, but are they willing to take the hit for this? Because here's the thing. Here's the thing. No, that's all right. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, this is what's going to take to get Joel Quenneville, to be a head coach, and I'm from a team standpoint. Before you make that decision, you have to go to the community. You got to listen before you actually make that decision. You have to go to these groups because there are, certain groups, advocacy groups out there to get their opinion and advice and their knowledge involved as a community as a whole before you even make this type of decision. And if you really want Joel Quenneville as a coach, you're going to have to go through these steps process to even have a chance of, having him on your team. Because if you don't, you're going to alienate a lot of people. And remember, it's a business, right? You don't want to do that. But from a moral standpoint, I think the community has to come together, in terms of not just the upper management, but the fans, these groups surrounding the city, in order for you to actually make that decision where you've sought guidance, expertise, all this kind of stuff, and then again, is there a market there where a team's willing to go through that? I don't know. I really don't know. Or is there a market for teams that don't care and it's just win only and they'll suffer, ask for forgiveness later? I don't know what the mindset is on it, because you look at the Bruins situation, and you're absolutely right. That's a great example. It could be a big tarnish to the legacy of the franchise.
Well, to me, here's the question that I have running through my head, which I don't have an answer to, and it bothers me a little bit because I like to think that I guess I'm speaking as a fan and not as an analyst, but like, you want to do the right thing. You want to be a compassionate person and say, hey, like, listen, the person did X, Y, Z. They went through, they made right, hopefully they made people whole, and, they should get a chance to work again. And again, for anybody that's listening to what we're discussing right now, before you make up your mind, seriously, Google Chicago Blackhawks, read for yourself what went on, and make your own decision. But here's one thing that somebody said to me last night that kind of has been sticking in my head all day. And, we're going to get to this in a second. Like, someone said to me, like, if you're the GM of, make up a team here. Bruce, you're the GM of the Houston Generals or whatever. You're an NHL GM. And you need a coach. Do you call this guy? And my first reaction was, I don't know. I really don't know. It depends on a lot of situations, a lot of factors and everything. But you know what the person said to me, and this is not someone, the person I was talking to is not like someone that does what you and I do or is a really, avid hockey fan. He's actually a football fan. And he said to me, I think that if a team hired him, in spite of all the stuff that happened, if he brings a Stanley Cup to that franchise, nobody's going to care. And I was like, wow, that's kind of cynical. But I started to wonder, like, is that the case?
And it's also the case as well, is this a betrayal to the victim?
Well, that's
another, we have to look at all angles, no matter how difficult this conversation is, Bruce, and my thinking is, I don't think there's a market for Joel Quenneville. Then again, I'm surprised Stan Bowman, got a job, but he's more
instantly.
And he's in Edmonton, so he's in left field, in terms of on the continent. Also, the other thing, too, is, the coaches are on TV all the time. They have the spotlight on them all the time. And, again, this is a very, very sensitive subject. But, again, I just don't think it's there, especially in today's world. But I could be wrong. But if a team's willing to take the necessary steps, and and the one thing we didn't mention too is the victim. I mean, is there any good that can come out of it aside from winning a Stanley Cup, if he gets that far, of having Joel Quenneville be a head coach? I mean, being a Penn Stater, I had to live through the whole Jerry Sandusky scandal. It was not easy because Joe Paterno was like a god at Penn State, and you can debate it any way you can, but the bottom line was Joe Paterno was fired because the Board of Trustees, whether you agree with them or not, at the end of the day, the Board of Trustees has the final say whether you're employed at Penn State or not. Nobody's above, the Board of Trustees, at Penn State when it comes to this stuff. So I don't think anybody is immortal. I think, again, it's getting back to the subject of Joel Quenneville finding a job. I just don't think it's there, but I could be wrong. I don't think there's a market.
I'm curious to see what happens with this because I think it could happen with a team like Edmonton, especially with, his former, business associate, Stan Bowman. The only real benefit to, not the only, but one of the benefits if he were to come back is you'd like to think that if he saw something like this happening again, he would have the experience to step in and prevent it from happening again. I mean, he did. I don't know if you remember this, but he did speak to NHL coaches and GMs at this this conference that the league had a while back about preventing this. So I think that the opportunity is there, but I think that it's not going to happen unless you have, and I'm going to say this right now, this is a very cynical opinion I have. I'm just going to be honest with you, Sam. I think it's going to be done by a GM that may have to save his job. And again, I wonder, I mean, if you pick a team, you have the firestorm, but at the end of the season, he helps you host the Stanley Cup. What is the reaction then? Do people say, well, he had his redemption tour allegedly, and now he brought us the hardware? But you're right. I think it's going to be a hard sell to do that. But
well, also, if Quenneville ever went to Edmonton, do you know it puts Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl in a really bad spot where you don't know if the players would be like, you got to be kidding me. You don't know how the players would feel as well.
Well, you'd have to find it out. And again, if you look at the Blackhawks situation, when that whole thing happened, if you read the whole report, and it's important to really read the whole thing because they had a firm come in that did this full investigation, everything, and it's not a good read. It's to me, as someone that played for a long time, a coach is someone you need to be able to trust, and you need to be able to go to and be the person that is kind of like your guy. If you're a player and you have a situation, and this meeting that happened, or I guess it's a bunch of meetings, the brass was all there. I mean, they were, according to this report, they were there. They knew this stuff was going on, and for whatever reason, whatever they did or didn't do, that's how we got to where we are. But he's not going to coach in Edmonton without Connor McDavid's blessing.
Yeah.
And, again, getting back to the Chicago Blackhawks situation, there was some shade thrown on the Blackhawks, Jonathan Taves, who was the captain of the team at the time. Mm-hmm. For, maybe what did they know? What did he not know? What did they do? Because, when he was in his prime, he was a pretty big name there. And I don't know, but the thing is, Sam, is you can't do a podcast. You can't talk about hockey like you and I are doing without discussing this type of stuff. This is life. Yeah. This is what goes on. And you made a really good point, which is why I think you're such a great analyst, is that you also have to think about the victims in this case. And I'll just say this to people that haven't read the report. It's a tough read. It's a tough read what especially John Doe, and we know who he is, but what this person went through.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure from a legal standpoint, there probably was a settlement. I don't remember, but no settlement can erase what happened, and and you will never forget, and you never move on. Really, I'll be honest with you, and that when trust is violated, it goes really deep, and on the bench, in the locker room, there's a lot of relationships are built. It is sacred. That's why getting press credentials through the league, you're allowing the press to go into the locker room, which is a very sacred place to do these interviews, do reporters, all that. That's why it's not for everybody. Although they could do a better job screening at times. But
you think?
Yeah. But the bottom, certain bloggers, I don't know. But it's for me, it's the trust that was violated, that it's unforgivable. You can't forgive, and that's where I'm having a hard time figuring out how he can have a job in the NHL, and what it has to be a perfect storm for Joe Quenneville, for any team, the situation to allow that to happen. But like what Gary Bettman and Bill Daly, I think in their mind is, okay, you've already served your punishment. You've already met the criteria. Let the markets dictate. And if the market dictates that you're not going to find a job, so be it. You don't want to have another, even when if somebody does hire Joel Quenneville, you don't want to have another Mike Babcock situation where the same thing happened again.
Yeah. You can't. And the best analogy that I could come up with when I was trying to figure out how I was going to explain my thoughts on this, which really goes more towards your opinion, Sam. If you look at what happened with Ray Rice, with the Baltimore Ravens, Ray Rice has basically, or after that situation with his, I don't know if she was his wife at the time or the partner, he essentially the same thing happened. He got suspended, he was unsuspended, and he never worked again because of the whole situation, the video and everything. And to me, this is tough. This is tough.
Again, a trust violated. Or remember the Trevor Bauer?
Yeah,
the Trevor Bauer. And again, I don't want to get into details, but I remember reading rumors of what's going on in the Los Angeles Dodgers locker room, nobody could look at him after seeing a lot of those pictures. Now, he had his day, I think he was exonerated. But at the time period, we're going back at the time period that all these pictures were coming out, and what teammate would want to be, teammates with him after that, so, again, it's one of those things where, with this topic, will he find a job again? Honestly, I don't think so, Bruce. I don't think it's going to happen. There's so many other good coaches out there that, why Joe Quenneville? What does he bring to the table, at this point in his career?
Yeah, and so let me just throw this out to you, because this is one of the things one of my other hockey analyst friends said to me this afternoon, and I have it on our topic sheet for today, is if you need to hire a coach now and you're an NHL GM, Sam, do you call him?
No. Because again, it's all about leverage. He brings, I mean, how could he just be the only coach available that I would, how can he be the one when there's so many other great coaches available? I mean, you're looking at Mike Sullivan that one day could get fired. You've got Andrew Burnett who could be fired, that can find a job in no time, just like what happened to Jim Montgomery. Quenneville will not even be on my radar unless I played with him for 10 years in the NHL. I know him as a person. I know the family if I was the GM. A lot of things have to happen for that to happen, and I just don't think it's going to happen. Even with expansion, what expansion team is going to hire Joel Quenneville?
Well, this is what I think is going to happen. I think he's going to get hired, but not as a head coach. I think he's going to wind up being like a VP of operations, some type of consultant. I don't know if he's going to be, but the head coaching position is too high profile.
Yeah.
I think that he'll get a job somewhere, but maybe as a VP of player development somewhere. That is a firestorm that I don't think a lot of franchises are going to take on.
Yeah. Well, Bruce, we went a little long with that topic, but switching gears.
It's important.
Absolutely. So this is the last part of the podcast. We talk Devils hockey. So I'm dying to know, because you kept on saying during this podcast, we're going to talk a little bit later about Dougie Hamilton being off the Team Canada roster for the Four Nations tournament. Good news for the Devils?
I actually think it is, because he's been dealing with injuries. He missed most of last season with that torn pec, I think it was, and he's coming back from that. And I think he's getting into a groove now. And some folks would say, well, let him get into a groove during the tournament. Let him get that rest to make sure he doesn't, overdo anything. And not only the games, but the travel, just chill for a little while and get ready for the playoffs. Get ready for the playoffs. Be healthy going into the playoffs. Use that time to rest. And, again, if the Devils are hoisting the Stanley Cup after, the season's over, no one's going to care, including Dougie, that he wasn't on the roster for that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it could be ego. A lot of it could be, why players want to be on that roster, and a lot of them love their country. But at the end of the day, you signed a 7-year deal, long-term, with the New Jersey Devils. That should be your first priority, the New Jersey Devils. It would have been great that if he made Team Canada, but at the end of the day, you just came off of an injury. You're blessed that you're coming back and you're roaring back. The team is in first place, one of the tops in the league. I don't care about the games in hand and all that kind of stuff. But the bottom line is Dougie Hamilton's back, and why ruin a good thing? Why overextend yourself, at least for this season, to go to a meaningless tournament that does not benefit you and the New Jersey Devils and that contract that you signed, that 7-year commitment?
Yeah, I mean, if you talk about players, even great players that have retired, let's talk about my favorite player, Scott Stevens, for example, who, in my opinion, other than maybe Bobby Orr, is the greatest defenseman in history. When you talk about his career, the first thing people say, All-Star, 3 Stanley Cups, and then maybe 20 minutes into the conversation, they'll say, oh, and he has this when he played internationally. Nobody cares about that. They want Stanley Cup championships. And so I think for the Devils, this is a blessing. And, we'll see what happens. It's going to be a great tournament, but I'm not unhappy that he's not playing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, again, the risk of injury, all that, it's what do you have to gain out of it? I think it's a blessing in disguise. I agree with you, Bruce, about Dougie Hamilton not being in the tournament. But we shall see about Jack Hughes. Jack Hughes has been injury prone, representing Team USA. I'm pretty happy about that. But you know what? It's going to bug me when somebody does a cheap shot or a freak accident. That's unfortunately going to have me on edge as well when you're watching this tournament.
That's
and it's not just one game, Bruce. That's what makes it tough. It's like the Olympics, not one game.
Yeah, well, we were saying that. I mean, that's the risk. 6 or 7 games. I think that's what it is because I think each team plays 3, and then I think they go into the playoffs. So maybe 6 or 7 or 8. I'm sorry if my math is not that good, but that's a big risk to me. For one of your biggest stars.
Yeah. Well, the other thing, too, I mean, remember, it's a business. Remember, the NHL is going to make money of it. It's an NHL event. There's a big difference between this and the Olympics because the Olympics, the NHL have to ship their players away. And if they get hurt, it's actually worse. They've played in the Olympics before. It's not an NHL-sanctioned event. No, it's more of an international Olympic committee, all that jazz when they send players in the middle of the season. Like basketball, it's not in the middle of the season for the Summer Olympics. You don't see that. So, and football is not really an Olympic sport, and then baseball, well, it kind of goes through, but you know what? They send minor leaguers practically to play the baseball. I don't think baseball is even an Olympic sport anymore. But anyway, the point I was trying to make is that, they're going to play the games anyway, and they're going to make a lot of money, the NHL.
You're right. It's going to be a great tournament, but I just don't want anybody to get hurt. So fingers crossed for that.
Yeah. Well, some of the comments, who cares, Sam? It's awesome having international hockey. If Jack takes a blow, as Alfred said, oh, well, I'll take the trade-off any day for international best on best being back. The problem is it's not best on best. It's like, is this tournament even necessary? Unless you get all the nations involved. That's where I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. And again, you've got a whole Russian contingent that's just sitting there not getting injured. It's kind of, there's an imbalance there that still needs to be worked out. And, again, the NHL is going to make money on it. I'm sure everybody's insured. At least if they're going to get hurt, they're going to be getting hurt under the NHL watch, not the Olympic Committee, the whatever organization that organizes the Olympics and the Winter Games. All right, Bruce. Well, I think we're out of time right now.
Yeah.
Great podcast. We're seeing a lot of people chiming in. Just a little programming note, if you don't mind, Bruce. Just got to plug this. Yesterday, we had no State of the Fan address presented by pucksandpitchforks.com because Comcast business went down at the bunker. They fixed it this morning. It wasn't my fault. I don't know. For whatever, everybody else had internet but me. But they reprogrammed everything. I don't know if they really fixed it, but we're on air right now, so that's all that matters. So we are going to have, at 8:30 p.m. Eastern tonight, State of the Fan address with Nick Villano and I, pucksandpitchforks.com, editor-in-chief. talking Devils, talking Instagram hockey, all that. And also going into the weekend, we're going to have Game Day Live and Devils After Dark. It's going to be a fun time. Bruce, thank you for giving your point of view. We were at that point, where we were just tackling, a hard subject matter, but actually having a non-inflammatory discussion about that whole situation with Joel Quenneville and all that. And that's what we hope to bring.
Well, Sam, that's why I think you're one of the best analysts in the league. So thanks for doing this with me again. We'll chat soon.
I wish you could say that to all the trolls that hate me on X.
They're irrelevant. Just remember that.
Yeah, I know. Besides, I don't really care anyway. All right, well, thank you to all those tuning in. Till next time, let's go Devils.